Episode 105, 3 Ways to Stop Relating to the Universe Like Your Moody Parent. My name is Dan Mason. In 2012, I was overweight, getting divorced, battling depression, and feeling trapped in a career where I was successful but bored and unfulfilled. And it's actually the greatest gift I've ever been given. I used my pain as a springboard to discover my life's purpose. Now, I want to share the same tools and strategies which help transform my life with you, so you can live Life Amplified. This episode is likely to ruffle a few feathers this week. However, we're living in an age where we're having all sorts of uncomfortable conversations, so why not add to it? And I want to give you context for the reason that I am having this conversation today about God and the universe, and really what I don't believe that we talk enough about in the trauma conversation, which is God trauma, based on your religious upbringing. But I'm currently in the middle of my 8-week accelerator group coaching program. I have an amazing group of clients in there. And the way that we structure the program is we address all your subconscious hidden blocks to success in the first 4 weeks. And then the back end of the program is really about setting one small goal that you can reach in 30 days that will help you accelerate your progress and create massive momentum. Now, one of my clients had a goal to start a business. She wanted to go down the entrepreneurship route, and she really wanted to have her first paid client within the next 30 days. So as she was explaining this in our Facebook group, she also followed it up with this. She said, "Am I overreaching by wanting to have my first client? Does the universe want to kick my ass for this?" And immediately it was sort of like this feeling of guilt or shame. Am I asking for too much? And not just the guilt and shame, but a belief that somehow if I ask for too much, I'm going to be punished. So where does that patterning get created in our life? And sometimes that can be religious trauma. Sometimes we just project our mom and dad stuff onto the universe. But I think that this is a really important conversation to have because, in my life, I've always looked at myself as a recovering Pentecostal. I grew up in that tent revival, hellfire, brimstone, speaking in tongues church, and really was a product of Left Behind culture. If you remember those movies from like late 80s, early 90s, they produce these epic cinematic things where, Jesus comes back and raptures away all the air quote good people to heaven, and anybody else who's committed a sin, we're left here to deal with plagues, famine, and a big old plague of locusts on top of it. We're here for the end times. And I will be honest with you, as a child growing up, when those movies came out, being 11, 12 years old, particularly hitting puberty, and now all of a sudden starting to have sexual thoughts and normal teenage urges that I was told were wrong or ungodly, it really sent me into having legitimate panic attacks at age 11, that somehow I was going to get left behind and that, that I wasn't going to be safe. And I was already a pretty anxious kid anyway, because of my trauma background, who was pretty hypervigilant. But then the thought became, well, if mom and dad are good, they're the good Christians. If they get taken away, oh my God, I'm going to be left here by myself. How am I going to survive? It really kind of screwed up when you think about it in hindsight, but was a tremendous source of fear and panic for me. My early remembrances of having a relationship with my higher power were not about love, providence, protection. It was really, I always had this image in my mind where I pictured God to look like King Friday from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood from the Land of Make-Believe, that he was just like the dude with the crown and the white beard, sitting with a journal in outer space, writing down everything that I ever did wrong over the course of my life. And I know that this is not just unique to the people who were evangelical Christians. No matter who I talked to who came up in a religious background, they have some variation of this. In fact, everybody believes that their denomination or religion cornered the market on guilt. When I talk to my Catholic clients, they're like, "Oh, Dan, you don't understand. I just have grown up with all this Catholic guilt." And then my Jewish clients are like, "Oh, but Dan, Jewish guilt. I had the Jewish mom and she gave me a guilt trip all the time." So everybody thinks that they've got the market cornered on guilt, but guilt is really, I think along with shame, the two least useful of the emotions in personal transformation. It is nearly impossible to move your life forward from a place of guilt or shame. And, we've talked a lot about the law of cause and effect on the podcast in the past, that for every cause, there is a specific and predictable effect. For every effect or circumstance that we experience in our life, there is a specific and predictable cause. But the problem is if you are starting at a place of guilt, the effect is that you've always got to be punished. And you're going to either believe that God is going to punish you, for the wrongs that you've committed. And I have clients who literally holding guilt and shame for, 20, 30, 40 years. And they believe that things not working out in their life is some sort of, withholding of prosperity because God is holding a grudge somewhere against them. And the reality is we're going to talk about today that the universe / God, that energy, whatever higher power you believe in, does not bless some people and punish others. That energy is the same for everybody. So if you believe that you deserve to be punished, it's not going to come from God. You're actually going to create the circumstances of punishment in your life. So it's a really interesting conversation to have. And look, there are some of you listening today who might not have grown up in a super religious household, but the same conditioning of either you do the right thing, you do as you're told by the system, whether it be your family or the church, or you're going to be punished. That's pretty much the idea of Santa Claus at the same time. He's making a list, he's checking it twice, he's gonna find out if you're naughty or nice, and so help you God, if you screwed up this year, you're going to get a lump of coal. It all ends in guilt and shame. It all ends in sort of, this belief that if I do wrong, I have sinned and there is going to be massive consequences at the end of the day. And it really, from an early age, begins to create a sense of separation from your higher power. You begin to feel separate from the divine, and therefore, in many cases, you can feel separate from worthiness, from abundance, from prosperity, and from love. I was just doing a coaching call the other day with a client of mine, a lovely lesbian woman, and she wants to become a coach to help other LGBTQ clients. And it's a great intention, but there's so much energy underneath where she's still sort of coming to terms with her beliefs that her family has given her about her sexuality. Her dad sort of, became super religious after he got sober and says these messages all the time. Well, I hate the sin, but, I'll still love the sinner. But the energy underneath that my client is taking on is still that she is wrong for being who she is. And that is just not a helpful energy that is going to move you forward. Like I said, if you believe that you are guilty, if you are in shame, it's always going to end badly. What do we talk about with the shame cycle, right? When we are feeling shame is the lowest vibration emotion on the planet. And when we are feeling it, we're going to go to some sort of coping mechanism to not feel it. Could be drugs, could be alcohol, could just be your cell phone. It could become work, right? So we look for some way to not feel the shame, which works temporarily. But as soon as the buzz from the activity of your choice wears off, as soon as you come down from the gambling high or the glass of wine wears off, there's the shame again. So you got to go back to another coping behavior, which wears off and creates more shame. That is the shame cycle. So what I wanted to give you today, if there is part of you that has been resistant to creating a real connection with the universe or your higher power because you believe that you're wrong, that you are still carrying guilt from things that had happened, years ago in your life, maybe even things that happened to you that you're blaming yourself for, and you believe that you're wrong in the eyes of your higher power. I'd like to give you 3 thoughts today, some points that I once heard Michael Bernard Beckwith speak about that really started to open up my mind and help me move through this, because the idea of God was so triggering for me for many years that I couldn't even really use the word. I was somebody who could only use the word the universe. That felt safer to me than the idea, of the Old Testament God that would smite me and the guy that, created a massive flood to destroy the earth except for Noah and two of each animal back in the day. Now, do you need to create a higher power connection? Not necessarily. But I will tell you, as you're working to get to a next level in your life, as you're working to create your amplified life and you're creating your goals, if you believe that you have to get there by a sheer force of will, and that there is no other power in the universe that you can lean on that is guiding you, that is supporting you along the process, it is a much more difficult way to go. I know, because I've lived that over the course of my life. And I'll tell you here when we get to the second point in a minute, but some of the greatest things that have happened to me are not things that I ever could have imagined. The best things that have happened to me in my life, the best things that have happened to me in my business, I know that I could not have created on my own. I never even could have dreamed them up or imagined them. Having a podcast that debuted #1 on Apple was never a goal. That seemed too big. It couldn't have occurred to me. And the fact that some of these things have happened has been the result of some sort of divine inspiration in my life. Whatever it is you want to call it, I tapped into a higher level of consciousness, and that connection is what's really just been like wind at my back. It's been turbo fuel to move faster in the direction of the things that I want to create. So let's talk about these three concepts about God or the universe that are more childish thinking and that we can upgrade in order to release ourselves from shame and guilt and feel more connected to ourselves, more love and acceptance for who we are, more love and acceptance from that universal unconditional love energy, and eventually from that state be able to manifest our goals faster. The first point that I'm going to share with you today is that God and the universe is not anthropomorphic, meaning God is not human. Now, if my mother heard me say this on a podcast, she would probably disown me. You know, there was a time when that belief would have been relegated to the occult or New Age section of the bookstore. But what's so interesting right now is how much this idea is being adopted now in mainstream religion. In fact, during the protests a few weeks ago that were happening across the country, CNN spoke to a Catholic priest by the name of Father Edward Beck. Now, I have never heard any religious pastor, preacher, priest of any denomination ever utter these words, particularly on live television. But I thought that this was fascinating. Father Edward Beck, as he was talking about the protests, said, "If we're created in the image of God, God has no sex, gender, color, no sexual orientation. It's universal love. So until we dispel this notion that God is a white man with a white beard sitting on a throne, then anyone who doesn't look like that is somehow less than." And that's a super important discussion as we talk about some of the unconscious bias that's happening racially in the country that's caused tension. Every depiction that you've ever seen of Jesus in the movies or in a photo hanging in a church, he is a very Caucasian, European-looking Jesus. He is a very handsome man. He's got that rugged, beard growing in, the steely blue eyes, the inviting smile, very well-conditioned hair. If People magazine's Sexiest Man Alive were a thing 2,000 years ago, Jesus would have been right there for Sexiest Man Alive. But the problem is, for so many people who are not of European and Caucasian descent, and particularly also for women and women of color, this depiction of Jesus is universal love that doesn't look like them. And they're told that we're all made in the image of our higher power. So you can see where there could be a disconnect, and also for white people create an unconscious bias that maybe we're a little bit better, than those other people. So I thought that was a really interesting point. But just to hear somebody say that God is really just energy, it's not a person, and that at the end of the day, God is universal love, that in and of itself is transformative, because what it means is that God therefore cannot have moods. Human beings have emotions. We hold grudges. We get angry. And the energy of this consciousness that every, spiritual leader has talked about is an energy of unconditional love. Now, if you are a person who assigns human characteristics to your higher power and it helps you, that's not a bad thing. There are many people I've heard during prayer talk about being safe in the arms of God or being held and protected. If that helps you and that provides a sense of comfort for your life, then that's wonderful. Go ahead with that. However, if you believe that God or the universe is the parent who's going to come scold you, who is going to punish you, who is going to send you to your room, then your relationship with your higher power is always going to be based more in fear and in submissiveness and compliance than in actual love. Now, does that mean that there are not consequences for our actions? Of course there are. If you want to go out and murder somebody, if you're going and breaking into somebody's home and you're stealing a car, of course there are ramifications for our behavior. But what if you could tap in to a belief? Would it be possible to believe that God or the universe does not see our mistakes as sins to punish, but as errors to correct? What if you could approach the mistakes you've made, the times you've blown it, with a sense of love and knowing that you can correct course rather than expecting punishment? And that brings me to the second point, the second concept of our higher power that we can upgrade to stop relating to God as a moody parent. And that is this, that the universe or God does not bless some people and curse others. That this energy is there for everyone. That if it's just an energy of love and we are physical manifestations of that energy, if we are all expressions of that energy, then we all have the ability at any time to open up our consciousness and let that energy be expressed through us. But the universe does not choose some people to bless and to punish others. And that's a really interesting thing when I look back on a lot of my upbringing, that my mom, when she would punish me, usually with a belt or a switch as a child, would always cite Bible verse as reason to do it. She'd say, Daniel, I don't want to do this, but the Bible says if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. And that one always seemed to work its way into the church. I don't know if that ever came up for you when I grew up, but I did some research on this. Believe it or not, that quote is not even in the Bible. Nowhere in the Bible does it say, spare the rod and spoil the child. It is not a Christian phrase. In fact, it actually comes from this narrative poem written in the 1600s by Samuel Butler, where two of the main characters are planning on starting a love affair, and one of the characters asks the other to engage in sadomasochism before she will go to bed with him. That's where the quote came from. Now, the quote that is in the Bible, when it comes to this idea of corporal punishment that happened in a lot of religious schools growing up and may have also happened in your home, the verse actually says, he that spareth the rod hateth the son. So, for context on this, I did a little bit more research. Turns out that shepherds, back in biblical times, had a couple different tools that they used to tend to their sheep. They had a crook where they could lift sheep out of holes that they had fallen into, and they also had this rod, which was a straight stick that they could use to guide the sheep. So if one sheep started wandering away from the flock, the shepherd could just use the stick to kind of guide the sheep back in the direction that it should go. However, the sheep were not beaten with the rod. So, sparing the rod, as it appears in Bible language, is the sense that a parent has to guide his or her child, teach the child right from wrong. And the word discipline comes from the same root as disciple, and discipline is about teaching, training. It's about setting an example of proper behavior and, giving consequences that help a child learn how to behave better. However, the word punishment comes from a root that means to inflict physical pain. And nowhere in the Bible or in the New Testament does Jesus tell parents to use corporal punishment with their children. Spanking is not discipline. It does not teach a child how to be a better person, right? It is punishment, and it teaches children that the method of dealing with people who don't do what you want is to hit them, which is just another vehicle for fear. And, for those of us who have gone through any trauma in our life, when you are in a fight or flight, fear response, if you're in a survival response, is it possible for you to learn and take in new information? Absolutely not. But once again, if you are operating in your life at guilt or shame at the level of cause, the result is always going to be punishment. Now, you might believe that your higher power is punishing you for the mistakes that you've made, but more often than not, what I find is we tend to punish ourselves. We will stay in a soul-sucking job because we believe that we should be punished for bad investments or for running up the credit card. People will not put themselves out there to experience love because they are still carrying shame over a divorce or a toxic relationship that happened in the past. So the honest question I'd like you to reflect on is, if there's any part of you that believes that you are just cursed or you're being punished by the universe, can you reflect honestly and look at the ways that you might be doing that to yourself? It's a very difficult question to look in the mirror on, and it challenges so many of those beliefs that we were brought up with. But I also believe it's an important question to ask that will set you free, because when we take judgment of ourselves out of the equation, we can own the mistakes that we've made without self-loathing, and then we can change them. That's what love allows us to do. If you want to go all the way back to the biblical story on this, atonement was not established in the crucifixion. People were crucified all the time back in the day. Atonement was actually established in the resurrection. It was in the rebirth that really completed that and made atonement possible. So could there be places in your life where you're crucifying yourself, and could you let that go? Let go of the past, shed the old identity of who you are, and step into new possibilities. Step into a new way of being. The third point that I was going to share with you today, so that we can stop relating to the universe as if it's a moody parent, is that this idea of God or the universe is not out there. It is not external to us. It's actually within you. I did do some work with a coach last fall around some of this idea of shame and religious trauma, and this was one of the really powerful exercises that worked for me, when I was journaling, and I would encourage you to do the same thing. Once I started to realize that this idea, whatever you believe this energy to be, God, universe, source, whatever you want to call it, can you accept that that energy is in all good things? Is that God energy in love? Is it in prosperity? Is it in money? Is it in nature? For most people, the answer would be yes. And if you can also believe that same energy is within you, that you are literally just a physical expression of that same energy that created all of this, the sun, the moon, the earth, the solar system, and you believe that energy is in all good things, therefore it's impossible for you to be separate from the things that you desire. The dream job, the soulmate relationship, the extra couple zeros in your bank account, the vacation, the dream home. You are not separate from that. The illusion of separation is what really keeps us stuck. If you believe that this higher power energy is unconditional love, there's nothing that you need to do to earn it. You don't have to plead. You don't have to beg. You don't have to justify. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to treat it like mom and dad, where you have to work hard to win their approval or affection. It's already there. It's available for you. So when I was working through a lot of this on my own, a good place to start every morning is I would write down 4 questions in my journal and just free write for, 5 to 10 minutes in the morning. First question is, what do I believe about myself? That's an important place to start. Do you believe that you are worthy of love, or, are you operating from this paradigm of, do you believe that you're unlovable or that you're a screw up? Second question to write down is, what do I believe about God or the universe? And then, 2 questions that I used in my life that might be helpful for you is, what do I believe about money? And what do I believe about my business? Now, for you, you could say, what do I believe about my purpose? Spend some time journaling through those and just notice what comes up without editing yourself. But if you do come across a trigger, that's really a place where you want to stop and contemplate. Could I be willing to see that differently? Could I just be willing to shift out of that fear-based thought? And what would it look like if I replaced it with love? You know, A Course in Miracles says that a miracle is just a shift in perception from fear to love. And that's a powerful exercise where you can do that. But I once had a coach tell me that the thing that you believe about your higher power is the most important thing about you, because it's going to determine whether you feel worthy, whether you're able to receive. It's going to affect how you relate to yourself and therefore how you relate to others in the world, how you show up. Like I said, I know that what I've shared today, some of this might be counter to the things that you were taught growing up in Sunday school. And as is the case with anything that I share here on the podcast, take what serves you and leave the rest behind. But what I want you to know is that you are unconditionally loved, and that you really, in your purest form, are unconditional love itself. And if you're a person who has been stuck, and if you've been living in the shame and guilt, it's not too late to reverse that. There are plenty of coaches, therapists, practitioners out there. This is something I've been talking about more and more in my coaching practice, maybe just because I had to do that work last year to really make peace within myself, and now clients are showing up that I could help through it. But this is a really powerful opportunity for you to shift your life. And that's my great wish for you, is that you realize that there is no block between you and the goals that you want externally. There is not a God block between you and the things that you want. There is not a money block, an opportunity block. Mostly the blocks that we have standing in between us and our purpose and a life with more meaning and fulfillment and happiness, it's internal. Find yourself a coach who can help you dissolve those internal blocks, and I promise this can still, pandemic, unrest, protests, in spite of everything happening in the world, this can be your most amplified year yet. Would love to get your feedback on the podcast this week and know how it resonates with you. Let's have a discussion. You can join us in our private Facebook group. Producer Matt is going to post the link to that in the show notes. And if this podcast serves you, if it's maybe got you thinking in a different way, could you screenshot the podcast and upload it to Instagram or Twitter? You can be sure to tag me at CSC Dan Mason. And if you'd like more info on any of my coaching packages and how you and I can work directly together to dissolve those internal blocks, get you moving in the direction of your purpose and amplified life, I got you. Go to my website, creativesoulcoaching.net. As always, turn down the volume on your negativity, turn up the volume on your purpose so you can live life amplified.